In this rather Orwellian time in history, it seems that the remarkable events of our lives have taken over the pulpit itself. And my only real task these days is to interpret these events in ways that continue to offer to our community an orientation to reality and some kind of bulwark against despair. Ron Paul thought he was quoting Orwell when he said, "Truth is treason in an empire of lies." Sounds kind of like something Orwell might have said, except that he didn't. But we know what it means. Our current president tells lies so often that now, for example, even when our intelligence agency tried to announce globally that Iran had set fire to 2 tankers in the Gulf of Oman, no one wanted to believe them. Japan and Norway both replied that they would need more evidence, and the tankers that were set on fire were from Japan and Norway. But even they refused to believe our administration. So preaching for me has become an exercise of what is treason to this administration, which is telling the truth in an empire of lies. But before I fall headlong into talking about current events, I want to invite you to remember with me a fictional novel from the 16th century, Don Quixote. The actual novel comes in 2 parts. It's impossibly long and terribly complicated, but the central themes of this long narrative were pulled out about 50 years ago and turned into a musical. In both the play and the movie and the character of Don Quixote in the book, Quixote is a middle-aged man who becomes inspired by old novels about the days of knights who chivalrously fought against the villains of the world to bring honor and justice to their victims. Now, he is indisputably mad as a hatter in a schizophrenic sort of way, imagining a windmill to be a 4-armed giant against whom he sets out to do battle. The character is simultaneously very sad and quite comedic. After the attack on the windmill goes predictably rather badly, he retreats to a local tavern that he imagines to be a castle. There's a barmaid there, Aldanza, which for 16th century Spain, barmaid basically means she is a servant girl, and to put it bluntly, the village prostitute. Men abuse her. They make sport of her. They taunt her. They treat her horribly. In the play, once Quixote tries to show respect to her, the men actually make up a song to sing to just embarrass and humiliate her and to make her life as miserable as possible. But when Quixote walks in and he sees Aldanza, he imagines her to be a noble woman, a princess of sorts. And he says that she is Dulcinea. When he tries to treat her as a noble object of his loyal adoration, even she is enraged. Abused people often assume that even kindness is somehow mocking them. When you come to think of yourself as a victim, you can be enraged by someone who fails to treat you like a victim. But in his persistent respect, he begins to inspire her to think differently of herself. In the end, the men of the tavern attack her, brutally beating her and raping her. Because folks in the world, once someone has been identified as a victim, or a people, a group of people, a race, a religion, there is resistance to ever allowing them to be anything but a victim. And admittedly, the play does not have a happy ending, so far as most people in the audience would see it. But towards the end, do you remember Aldanza forces her way into his home as he's lying on his deathbed because she realizes that she can no longer live as Aldanza. She has to be Dulcinea. And when Quixote has died, his faithful companion, Sancho, refers to her as Aldanza, and she immediately corrects him. And she says, "My name is Dulcinea." Quixote is dead, but his spirit lives on. 500-year-old novel leaves footprints in our language. Will describe a foolish objective or quest to be quixotic, because it's stupid, it's false, it's imaginary. We will say that someone who strives for justice in meaningless, symbolic ways is tilting at windmills. Quixote is the quintessential madman, but in the end, recognizing that it was fiction. Was the woman that he adored actually Aldonza? Or was she really Dulcinea? The men in the tavern looked on her as a thing to be used. Quixote, in his madness, saw her as fully human, and more than that, a woman to be adored. Surely you must know where I'm going. The men of the tavern may have been technically correct. She was a servant girl, a maid, a slave of sorts, more or less a sex slave. I mean, really, in that culture, in that time, that was just done. So it may have been factually true, but the madman saw her as something of inestimable value. And simply by seeing her that way, her reality changed. I do not mean to be cruel or manipulative to you today. I love you, I respect you. If I could think of a more gentle way to bring this up, I would do it. But when you look at these children who have walked or been carried through 1,000 miles of poverty, danger, civil war, many suffering sexual assault, to show up at our border asking for refuge, when you look at these little brown children sleeping on a concrete floor covered by an aluminum blanket, left undernourished, dirty, often without diaper changes, sometimes sick, and many infected with lice, when you look at them, what do you see? Illegal immigrants, children who do not deserve decent treatment because they should not have been brought here in the first place. This has been announced from the pulpits of major American churches. Do you see Aldonza? I see Dulcinea. Amen. Trump said that the whole family separation policy was started by Obama and that he was trying to reunite families. That's a lie. When confronted by the squalid conditions in which children are being housed in concentration camps on the border, Trump blamed the Democrats who would not give them enough funding to be able to provide blankets, soap, and toothbrushes. This is Caliburn International Corporation. It's one of the many for-profit corporations. This one is the largest concentration camp operated by the American government. It's in Homestead, Florida, where several hundred children are being detained. There are more than 15,000 children currently in U.S. custody in these detention centers. Caliburn International and their ilk are charging taxpayers $750 a day per child. $750 a day. The Trump administration spokespersons told the media that they cannot then afford proper bedding, clean clothes, soap, and toothbrushes for these children because Democrats in Congress are holding up the funding. Now, Hilton Garden Inn here in town, one of the better hotels, is where I put Bishop Spong and Christine Spong when they're in town. It costs $110 a night. $55 per person if you look at it that way. But we're not talking about a 3-star hotel, are we? Do you know what a foster parent in Missouri is paid for the care of a child? For children this age, $11. For a teenager, $12.40 per day. These people charge $750 a day, and they're not obligated to provide a bed or soap. $11 a day for a child. Mark and Laura Rowland used to be foster parents. You're my hero. I love you. Foster parents are the true heroes in American service to children these days. But can you imagine getting $750 a day for a child? That trust fund baby would want for nothing. That would be the sweetest smelling, best dressed baby you have ever met. We go to the movies every day and whitewater just to finish off the afternoon. But to do that, you have to see them as people. But you can also see them as a cash opportunity. All of this is going on while conservatives are trying to scare tax-paying citizens about the socialism behind universal health care and tuition-free higher education. I wish I could say, and I know we've got a big audience online, but they're self-selected, aren't they? They turn to our YouTube and iTunes channel because they already agree with whatever they think I'm going to say today. But I wish I could talk to the people right now who are afraid of socialism because that word is being triggered and used to make them afraid not to vote for conservatives. But what I would like to say to every one of them is that illegal immigrants are not the reason why you are poor. Corporate socialism is what is making you poor. Thank you. It is the corporate socialism that allows Amazon to make $12 billion in profit last year and to pay absolutely no taxes. Everyone in this room paid more taxes to the federal government this past year than Amazon.com or General Electric or General Dynamics or any of the other military-industrial complex. It is the corporate socialism that allows this company to charge $750 a day for a child that's being kept in a dog cage rather than spending money on providing health care, education, and a living wage to our citizens. And come on, 15,000 children? What is going on with that? 15,000? President Obama was often criticized for his aggressive deportation policy. In fact, many Latinos called him our deporter-in-chief. Obama's administration deported over 400,000 illegal immigrants during the 8 years that he was in office. The problem here is not so much the deportations under Trump. The problem for me is the people he won't deport, the people he won't allow to be returned to their family. These 15,000 kids are being held for months on end. They are virtual prisoners that are being used to transfer wealth from taxpayers in America to the people who support the campaigns of Republican politicians. Trump promised on the campaign trail that his first day in office that he would deport 2.5 million illegal immigrants. There's been no massive deportation. In fact, many of those illegal immigrants are this morning changing bedding at Mar-a-Lago and other Trump facilities. There are illegal immigrants doing work that they cannot hire other people to do in restaurants and in hotels all over America, many of which are owned by our president. But for him, these children are all Aldonza. I'm just asking you to see them as Dulcinea. When my daughter was little, she went through some tough attachment issues. A lot of adopted kids do. They were abandoned by their birth parents at birth, and they oftentimes have some real fears about detachment. So she would sometimes just start screaming when I had to go to work, and she would scream inconsolably for hours. This went on for several weeks until she eventually became convinced that I would always come back at the end of the day, that it was going to be okay. It was traumatic for her because I was her primary caregiver. And for a very young toddler, separation from your primary caregiver is like death. You're afraid you won't survive. Imagine being a toddler who traveled hundreds of miles facing exhaustion, dehydration, starvation, and then crossing the border and being separated from your primary caregiver, the person that held your hand while you walked, who kept you safe, who carried you, who protected you. And then you're put in a dog kennel, separated from anyone you've ever known in your life, cared for by people that don't speak your language. And mom or dad doesn't come home at the end of the day. or at the end of the night, or next week, or next month. Can you imagine the trauma? I remember hearing my daughter's screams as I walked out to my car. And to think of children that scream and scream and cry until they're all out of tears and their throat is hoarse. And what you see in their faces becomes a blank stare when they have given up all hope and their little hearts are empty. There was a large study done several years ago, 17,000 people in the study for adverse childhood experiences study. Paul, you know about that one, don't you? The Kaiser Permanente Fund did it. And they discovered that if you suffer trauma as a child, you're much more likely to suffer from depression as an adult. And the more trauma you experience, the more likely you are to have depression as an adult. And they broke it down into numbers, that if you have 6 separate childhood traumatic events, 6, these kids have hundreds. If you have 6, you are 5 times more likely to suffer from depression for your life. If you have 7, you are 300% more likely to commit suicide as an adult. What we are doing to these children, yes, it's child abuse. Yes, it is. But worse than that, we're not just taking months of their childhood away from them, we're taking their lives away from them. They will never be normal again. We are, with taxpayer dollars, at $750 per child per day, traumatizing 15,000 children who will never have a secure adulthood because of what we are doing to them right now. So at noon on Tuesday, protesters are gathering outside the local offices of members of Congress to protest this state-sponsored child abuse that is traumatizing these children every single day. I'll be outside our congressman's office, Billy Long, at noon on Tuesday. I hope all of our listeners and viewers will find the congressional office nearest you. Congress will be out for their 4th of July recess, so there's a chance, even if Billy Long isn't playing poker in Las Vegas, that he might actually be here in his office. So maybe. As bad as the trauma is, though, I have to remind you, and again, I'm not trying to be cruel, but everybody doesn't survive the process of trying to cross the border. Our news moves so quickly that we just hear about one case at a time. But in the past 2 years, 24 people have died in ICE custody, most of them children. One this past week from thirst, died of thirst, not enough water when she was in our custody. Many others suffer from the flu. When this gruesome image of a father and infant daughter who drowned and what happened is this guy swam across the Rio Grande with his daughter holding onto him, set her on the bank. His wife was struggling. He went back out into the river to try to help his wife to shore, and the daughter panicked at being separated from her dad and ran back into the water. So he sees his wife drowning on one side and his daughter drowning on the other side. There's a bridge there, but the bridge was closed by the Trump administration because that was the point of legal request for asylum. But as horrifying as this image is, it's not an isolated incident. About 300 immigrants are believed to die along the Mexican-U.S. border every year. Some drowned, and some die of thirst in the desert. The skeletal remains of immigrants are often found in the Arizona desert. And there's no way to accurately get at a death toll, but it's 300 plus. Some local residents have formed a group called No More Deaths. And they go out and they know the pathways that the immigrants usually follow, and they just put water and dried foods out there. This guy, Scott Warren, is a 30-something school teacher in Arizona. He was recently arrested for giving water to dying immigrants. He found 3 immigrants in his barn. He didn't do anything but give them a little bit of water and food, and he was arrested by ICE agents, put on trial, and was to be sentenced to 20 years in prison for saving these people's lives. His trial ended this week in a hung jury because all of the jurors, and I don't know, not a lawyer, that's one of the things I'm thankful for. I don't know how many people have to not vote, but there was a hung jury. But there were ICE agents who arrested him. There were prosecutors who brought a case against him. There was a judicial system that tried to put him in prison for 20 years. They just didn't get away with it this time, because he refused to see these children as being less than Dulcinea. I don't mean to make this such a hard sermon. Evidently harder on me. I accept that the definition of preaching is speaking the truth to power. And now in this administration, what I do has become treasonous. Speaking truth in an empire of lies. Not all of you are called to be preachers. Everyone doesn't have to be a prophet. Everyone doesn't have to be a journalist or even a protester. But damn it, you can give a cup of cold water to someone who's dying of thirst. And you can refuse to see the people cast off by society as just someone that you can make a profit off of. You can choose to see them as the princes and the princesses of Central America. There is no Aldonza among them. They are all Dulcinea. So let me end where we began this morning with this paraphrase of a first century bit of the Jewish Talmud. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justice now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work. You can't fix everything. But you are not set free to abandon it. Join me, please, in being so crazy that we see illegal immigrants as people. Amen.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.